Hey guys, we're here at the first Patreon assembly, and I'm here with Jarvis Johnson, and he currently is wearing a shirt that says "You Matter Now and Forever." What does that mean? Everybody's been talking about the back of your shirt. It's on there too, and they're saying what a great shirt it is. Where's that come from?
There's a creator named Demetrius Harmon. He's like a fashion designer. He like used to make sketch videos on YouTube, and he made this like shirt and a lot of his fashion line around, you know, like accepting yourself for who you are. And it's a message that I, as a creator, as someone who's like pretty harsh on myself, like to remind myself of regularly. So it's nice to have like a little fabric token of that message.
Is that what you try to do as a Patreon creator as well?
Absolutely.
It's interesting because I saw that you were an ex-software person, and that's kind of wild to me that now you've so drastically gone in a different direction. Can you talk to me about that journey a little bit?
Yeah, so I actually, I used to work at Patreon. I worked at Patreon for 3 years.
What was your job?
I was a software engineer and an engineering manager. And in February, so it's almost 8 months now, I left Patreon to do YouTube full time. And to be I mean, for me, software engineering, it's a lot like making videos on YouTube. It's a creative problem-solving problem. You've got like a goal and a destination, or you've got a starting point and some sort of goal that you're trying to reach, and you've got to creatively get there. And so I do see them as very similar things, but it does sound weird on paper.
It definitely sounds incredibly different, like a different part of your brain altogether.
Yeah, well, I was like a pretty artistic kid, and then
Growing up, you mean?
Growing up, and then I went to school for something super technical, and so I feel like the past few years for me have been like getting back to those roots.
What was your major?
Computer science. So it was very, very technical, but it's a nice thing, like background to have now, because being an independent creator involves wearing a lot of different hats and understanding a lot of different parts of industry that, having worked like at a company like Patreon and seeing how products are built and how large teams solve like really difficult problems, I have exposure to microcosms of that I could try to apply to my creator life.
Take me back for a second, because you are working a job at Patreon, and you, I'm sure, are getting salary and benefits and are secure there, and you decide, I'm going to leave to full-time be a creator who actually uses Patreon as a platform and YouTube and all of those things.
For sure.
Were you scared crapless? How did that decision go?
Yeah, so I was scared crapless, for the record.
Thank you for quoting me, yes.
But I'm a pretty risk-averse person, so I started planning things out, started talking to leadership at Patreon. The funny thing about Patreon is that it's a company of artists and creators, so I've never felt more supported in potentially like venturing off into a creative career. I kind of gave myself maybe 6 months, and then I would reevaluate things, and it's been 8 months, and so far so good. But it definitely took a big leap of faith, and also like giving myself a window of time that I was going to see how I felt at the end of it, and I'm really happy so far with the decision.
So I'm glad it's successful, but I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are listening that are thinking about maybe leaving their very secure jobs to full-time, do something like you have. What is your advice for them? Do you think that they should just take that leap, or should they try to plan a little bit out? Should they do 6 months like you did and then reassess?
So it really depends on the person and the situation. There's no blanket advice for this, but make sure that you feel comfortable with making that decision. Not everybody can afford to, leave their job. I was doing YouTube and Patreon for a year, like where I was waking up at 6 a.m. every day, and like from 6 to 9 or from 6 to 10 working on YouTube stuff, going into the office from like 10 to 7, 10 to 8, like leaving after dinner, and like going back home and like falling asleep with exhaustion. And that was also like a very sacrificing time of my life, and it wasn't something that was sustainable for the long term, but it got me into a position where I could kind of see a world where I was doing creating full time. And once I could start to piece together that world and make a plan for myself, it alleviated a lot of my worries. From an analytical perspective, from a like practical perspective, it alleviated my worries. In my heart and my soul, it was still terrifying. But sometimes we have those decisions in life where you just you don't know if it's gonna work, but you take a chance. But when you're taking a chance, make sure that if it doesn't go, you're not like on the streets, because that's another thing that I think there's a lot of advice. It's like you just gotta hustle and you gotta like rough it, and it's like, please take care of yourself. I don't want to glorify that kind of I don't want to glorify that message too much, because it could be so unlikely that something works if you're just going in blindly. So
but how do you do that? Is that making sure that you have a certain amount in the bank before you leave, or making sure that you don't burn any bridges, so in case you needed to go back to, say, a Patreon, that you could?
Yeah. I mean, never burn bridges. That's a pretty good piece of advice. But
thank you so much.
Yeah, and for me personally, I started saving pretty aggressively. I knew like what I would need if I was making no money from YouTube for my window of time. So I tried to, knowing that YouTube was making money for me, I left that out of the equation, because I didn't want to rely on it, because if every day I was waking up and looking at my YouTube analytics going, are we eating tonight? You know, like that's a pretty stressful situation to be in. So for me, what worked for me was making sure that I had a window of time where I could try things out and not expect a return immediately, because I think one of the more stressful things would be this has to work instantly or else.
As the only person we've talked to today who did actually work for Patreon, I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah.
What is the culture like there?
Oh, absolutely.
What happens? Like, are you guys being creators all day? Is there a lot of business stuff going on?
Well, so
obviously there's business stuff going on.
Yeah, there is, contrary to popular belief, business stuff that goes on at Patreon.
I literally I can't even picture it in my head, so I'm like, business?
Yeah,
creative?
So, I mean, Patreon is simultaneously a group of the most creative and smartest people I've ever met in my life, doing what they're like world experts at. I think I never could have I never would have started my YouTube channel if it wasn't for Patreon. When I was 14 years old, I had a YouTube channel and it had some success, and then I got scared of like not being able to top myself and quit.
What was it?
It was, I mean, I was dancing in a High School Musical and stuff. It was a good time, just joking around with my friends. But I was so like, when I went off and studied a bunch of technical things, I was so disconnected from that like artistic upbringing that I had, that being around Patreon, where everyone is super good at their job, but then also people are just randomly musicians or like virtuosos at some sort of craft, and being around that, and then being around Patreon's creators who we were serving, helped me be more in touch with my own creativity. And so what it's like to work at Patreon, it's a bunch of like really talented people who truly deeply care about creators and are creators themselves, trying their best to serve that community.
Well, let me just tell you this. You matter now and forever. Thank you guys so much, AfterBuzzers, for watching. Buzz you later. Thanks, Jarvis.